Happy Sabbath, everyone. I am grateful for Alan Bush, who put together our new podium. Isn't it pretty? Amen. All right. It's not often, sometimes we forget how folks are helping in various ways of the church. And you remember Jesus had fallen down in the foyer, and Alan got him back up. I am not the best at asking for help, and so I'm always grateful when others are able to step in and do what they can do based on the skills they have and do it well. So thank God for all of you and the ways that you give to this community. Again, welcome to those of you who are visiting with us. We've been going through the Bible from Genesis, not chapter by chapter, but looking at different stories that help us to understand how the history of the Bible, how our history relates to where we are now, what God is teaching us for today. And so today we are in the book of Numbers, as Ella read for us. The reality is of these verses is that when we focus on the good old days, we miss out on walking with the Lord. He had been leading the children of Israel. He'd been leading them in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And whenever the pillar moved, they moved, right? He was very clear in when it was time to move and where they should go as they headed toward the promised land. He had been providing for them every step of the way. They had everything they needed to build the tabernacle that he asked them to build, the place where he would dwell. And he had been feeding them manna, fresh manna from heaven fell every single day. You know, when the Bible talks about God's great, his goodness toward us, his grace being new every morning, great is his faithfulness. This manna fell every day. They had fresh manna every day. And the Bible talks about how it tastes like wafers with honey. And when I think about a wafer with honey, I mean, that sounds pretty good. But after you've been eating something that's a little sweet and yummy for a very long time, you're ready for something else. What's yummy becomes boring. And instead of being grateful for God's blessing, they start, and in some ways we start, to complain that they no longer had fish. Remember the fish? That fish was so good. Remember how we wouldn't even have to pay for it. We'd fry it up with some onions and some garlic and some leeks with it, and we'd have some cucumbers on the side and some melon. Remember the fish? It was so good. Oh yeah, you're right, another would say. It was so good. What was this stuff again that we have, this manna? But hey, another person pipes up, we were slaves back then. Yeah, but the food was so good. Don't you remember the fish? Yeah, but don't you remember when we had to make bricks without all the materials? I know, but that fish. We assume over time, we assume that we're going to remember not just the fish, but also the slavery. We assume that we'll remember all the details of what has happened, but the reality is that doesn't always take place in our minds. We assume that we'll always be forward thinking, that we'll always be striving for future success and future growth and deeper understanding of what God has in store for us, but in reality, our memory becomes really selective, especially when things aren't going the way we want them to go. We want fish. We want the good old days. So let's play a game called Open the Box that you've been holding on to for the last 30 years. Have you played that game recently? We should probably all play this game from time to time. So this is from 1992. It was my 8th grade class t-shirt. Do you see how big it is? I was not big enough to fit into this shirt, but that was back when big shirts were the thing, and that's come back, which is weird, but my mother said that's what would happen. And on the back are the signatures of all of us who graduated together from 8th grade. It's a great shirt. I haven't worn it in a long time, but I'm holding on to it because it just has wonderful memories. And there's some other shirts like this one from high school, and it has 96 because that's the year I graduated, and I think this was the shirt maybe from our sophomore year. Great, great memories. Oh, but then I can go even further back to another shirt. Man, this shirt, it's amazing it doesn't just crumple in my hands. This is from 1989. I know, you should all go through your boxes. This is from 1989, and it says, "Forward with Christ, Adventist Youth Congress, Monrovia, April 5 to 8, 1989. And here it has the Liberian flag. This is when I was living in Liberia, 1989, folks. I still have it, though. Great shirt, great memories. I think I have this memory, and I'm not sure if it's correct, but you know how you remember selectively. And I have this memory of us wearing those shirts and walking down the streets of the city. I don't know what exactly we were doing, but yeah, great memory. This one is also from my life in Liberia, another shirt that should probably just be falling apart, but it was from our school that my sister and I, my older sister and I went to. It was called the British Independent Preparatory School. We called it BIPS. And it was a school there in the city run by the British government. There was also a school run by the American government. That was the real fancy school. But yeah, the British school, we loved it, and we were all divided up into 3 or 4 teams, and my team was the kestrels, which is a bird, and our color was, eagles. Kestrels was blue. I was an eagle, and our color was yellow, and we would have sports days and compete against each other. Great times. Great, great memories. Mind you, the last time I was at that school, I believe I was 10 years old, but that's a great shirt. I'm holding on to it. Let's see what else is in this box. Oh, here's a camera that I bought. I think I bought it on my 23rd birthday. I was living in Chicago at the time, and I remember thinking, I need a camera. And so I went downtown and I bought myself a camera, and it still has film in it. I don't know what it has on it or if it can even be developed, but look at this. Oh, man. I mean, this was grad school in a box. When I was living in Chicago, again, I had this afternoon class, and I couldn't stay awake for the life of me. And so I would go to one of these little stores in the building there, and I would buy wheat thins and chomp away. And I kept the box. Why? Because it fit these perfectly. Yep. Haven't used this in, a decade or more, but holding on, because you just never know. You just never know what you'll find, And let's see what else is in this beautiful box of memories. Oh, yes. Oh, these were the days. It's a stamp album. Anyone collect stamps as a kid? I thought I would have the world's greatest collection of stamps one day. I don't remember the last time I put anything in here, but I can't let it go because, maybe my kids will want it one day. Let's see what else is in here. Oh, this is a good one. Oh, this is from when I was a freshman in college, and I thought I would be a photographer one day. And so here you've got film that's been developed, and you've got all these pictures. You can't see them all clearly. They're black and white, and we had all these assignments we had to do of black and white photography, and I would go into the darkroom and develop my pictures, and I was pretty good. This is a really cool picture. You can't tell from where you are, but what you can do in the darkroom is you can put other pictures on. This was before Photoshop. You can put other pictures on your picture, so they're like 3 pictures in one. I was amazing. And that's what I wanted to do. And there's one more thing I'll show you here. That is a great memory. It's from Sabbath school in 1980, I don't know what. And it has a Bible verse, "Be kind to one another," Ephesians 4, verse 32. And there's 2 little kids. And I've kept it for a very long time. This box is great. It's wonderful. And it just takes me back to when times were simple and things were good, Those days when you just run outside and you play till you're stinky and sweaty and itchy, but you don't want to come back in. Those were the days. These were the days when I was in college and I could just sit because I had all this time and just listen to music. Do you remember those days? You just turn something on and just listen to the whole album because you had time. Those were the good old days. It's amazing. It's amazing how good those days were. And I wish I could go back to when times were this simple. The thing is that as I walk down memory lane, I forget that while this was a great period of time living in Liberia, we were there for almost 7 years, and I have such great memories, but the reality is I was a child. I left when I was 11, and so I'm thinking of all the good, but the reality is that my parents didn't have all these glitzy, glamoury, wonderful times. They were living thousands of miles away from family support systems that they were used to. We didn't have a phone in the house. In order to call home, they'd have to use a phone of a neighbor. I forget that this smell of the dark room in college, even though it became beautiful to me, all these chemicals, it was just wonderful. And the red, what's the light called? Justin, help me out. The red light, yeah, that was in there. That helps you see. I remember all of that, but then I forget that there was this teacher of mine who was the head of the department who called me into his office one day and said, "You know what, Michaela, I know this is what you're thinking of pursuing, but here's what it actually looks like to make a career in photography. And from what I know of you, I just don't think this is where you should go. Not telling you what to do, but I'm just giving you my thoughts on the situation." And I think back to this reality that if I had pursued this thing that I thought I was so good at and would love, I'd actually be miserable because nothing in me is cut out for a business in photography. As I ooh and ah over my wheat thins box, I forget what it was like to sit in class and wonder how in the world I'm going to read all these pages of all these books and write all these papers, and was I really cut out for this field? I mean, there were so many people that I was going to class with day in and day out, younger and older than me, that just seemed so much smarter. Was this really for me? And as I think about living in Chicago and how wonderful that was, I can forget the fact that my guardian angel had to work overtime. Because even though I was careful, I wasn't a city girl. But I would boldly take the bus, even though kids who lived there were like, "We don't take the bus." And I would do all these things that made sure my guardian angel was on top of her game. All in all, by just focusing on these sweet memories, I tend to forget that God was leading me through. Yes, they're beautiful memories. It would be nice to have such a simpler existence without all this technology, without all these distractions, but there was a life that God was leading me through, that only He could lead me through. There was that time where we were trying to leave Liberia because in 1989, at the end of that year, would begin the 14-year civil war. And in 1990, we were able to finally leave the country, but at first we weren't sure how it was going to happen because we could only find 5 tickets and we needed 6. And my dad said, "It's okay, I'll stay." Told my mom, "You go with the kids." And she said, "We came here together. We are leaving together." And God opened the doors and made that possible. It's one thing to remember the good old days and to wish they were back, but the key is we have to do so wisely. Instead of just longing for the days gone by, as we open up this box, we've got to get to a point where we close it up and we say, "Thank you, God." Because none of this would be a good memory without what you've brought me through. As we look at the times gone by, as we reminisce, We've got to realize that He's the reason we're here today. And instead of wishing that we could recreate these past experiences, we have to remember and get excited about what God can create and do through us now. Yeah, He did some wonderful things for us back then, and He's still in the business of doing wonderful things now. Even as countries go through wars, famine, even though as parts of the country every now and then are just wrecked by tornadoes and other storms, even in the midst of that, there are things that God is doing that are wonderful things, wonderful, not just memories to look back on, but things to be involved in now, if we don't just look at the past and reminisce, but focus on today. And after all, if we just look at the past and how good that was, we're missing out on experiences with new people, on growing with new faces, new energy around us. So sure, go through the box. Sure, reflect on when you had that good fish. But then close it up and remember who God has been. God has helped us, not just with getting that free fish when we were slaves in Egypt, or that free food when we were living under the roof of our parents, but He has always provided, even in the New Testament, where we find another story of fish. This is one of those stories that appears in all of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But John is the book where we find this detail that we don't get in the other stories. It's this detail about the child. See, there were all these thousands of people that had gathered around, and Jesus was talking to them, teaching them, and it got to that point in the day when it was time to eat. It was time for some fish. But all they had was what Andrew brought to Jesus via a young child who offered up his 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. And in that moment, Jesus blesses what is brought to him and then multiplies it. But if all we think about is the fish of the past, then we won't even be ready to experience the goodness of God in the present. What's at stake? What's at stake for you and for me if we're just focused on the days gone by? What's at stake if the only good we can find in our lives is from 20 years ago, 30 years ago? What's at stake is our ability to grow with God and to experience contentment with Him no matter what. God had been guiding the children, leading, providing, and they knew that. But all it took was what the Bible calls a rabble, which was apparently a group of people that weren't necessarily Israelites, because along the way, as they're in their travels, they've met up with other people who are perhaps helping them in various ways, and they start to miss what once was. The grumbling apparently starts with this group of people, and then the Israelites pick it up. That tends to happen. One of us says, "Oh, man, remember that fish?" And then another says, "Oh, yeah." And then it just continues. But what's at stake is if we just focus on that, we don't find contentment with God here and now, and we cannot walk faithfully with Him through all the ups and downs of now. This applies to us individually, and it applies to us as a church. The Bible, our history of faith, continues to remind us of what works and what doesn't work. And being with God, where God is now, is what works well. Being with God in the memory of who God has been, yes, that can be helpful, but we cannot stay there. We cannot sit there and wish we could return. Being with God where God is now is what works well. Yes, God was with the Israelites through slavery, and yes, he did help them through, and he was with them then. In the midst of all the uncertainty, in the midst of manna, day in and day out, he was still providing. I don't want to be where God was. Because the reality of where God was is that while it was good for me, perhaps, it wasn't necessarily good for you. God was delivering and working, but you may have been in a different space and time where things weren't beautiful. I don't want to go back to where God was. Even though God was there, I want to move to where God is now. How about you? There is so much that God has for us now. If we're willing to not look back on the good old days as what we must return to, but look at them as moments where God has provided, which then propel us forward to where he is now and what he is doing now. We've been in this journey of visioning as a church. We started last fall with Pastor Don Keel, and he came and he preached and he met with us, and we're still on this journey. But one of the things that stops us from visioning well is when we keep opening this box. One of the things that holds us back is when we keep on wishing for when we had that good fish. And so today, as we think about what God is doing now, as we think about how God has impacted our lives just yesterday versus 30 years ago, as we keep things more current and fresh in our memory bank about the goodness of God, I believe our vision will become clearer, our courage will be deeper, and together we will move forward in the way that God wants us to go. A way that brings him glory, and a way that helps others see him as Lord as well. And one of the things that we can do to help us in that way is to calm our spirits. This hymn that we're going to close with says, "Be still, my soul. The Lord is on your side. He's with you. Be still." There are things that you wish could happen, you thought were great before. Be still and know that he is still God. He was with you then, and he will be with you now and forever. This promise is sure. Let's stand together as we sing.